Welcome to the Brooklands Museum, here in Surrey. This place is unique in the sense that its history is closely interlinked, not just with early forms of motor racing, but also with British aviation pioneers. As a result, it houses a sizable collection of historically significant cars, motorcycles, and airplanes. In 1907, the world's first dedicated racing circuit was built here by one Hugh Loke King, whose estate this was. The circuit was a 2.7 miles long banked oval, of which today only a short northern section still exists. Just imagine standing here a century ago, watching race cars and motorcycles hurtling by at breakneck speeds. The various collections are housed in these dainty little sheds and garages, where drivers and mechanics tinkered away on their cars, hoping they would win races or set records. Today, museum staff is routinely seen working on the various exhibits. So let's start the car segment with a motor bicycle. I know nothing about them, but I heard of this one before, the Brock Superior. And for good reason. It was the first motorcycle to lap Brooklands at over 100 miles an hour with a sidecar. There are many more, but let's move on. The Holy Grail of Brooklands, the Napier-Railton. It was the fastest car ever to lap Brooklands circuit at 143 miles per hour in 1935. Because the circuit fell into disuse during the war, nothing would take that crown away from the Railton. Purpose-built to break records, the car is powered by a 24-liter Napier aero engine with 12 cylinders in a W formation. In total, the Napier-Railton broke 47 speed records all around the world. The baby Bugatti is an electric-powered reproduction. The 4.5-liter Bentley, an original. The display showcases not only the on-track rivalry between Bentley and Bugatti, but also their diametrically opposed racing philosophies. More power or less weight. Something you don't see very often. A Duesenberg race car. Not that Duesenbergs are all that common. A French light racer. The Samson Grand Sport. And the ubiquitous Austin 7 in British racing green, of course. The Bugatti Type 37 Grand Prix, a fairly successful car in its class. Bugatti never made a bad car. Big or small, attention to detail was paramount. Alta Voiturette. Sounds exotic, but in fact it was built right here in England in someone's shed. And another homebrew special. Although by the mid-50s factory-built cars would dominate, leaving little room for privateers. Here we have a BMW-powered Formula One car from the turbo era. Some versions of the 1500cc engine would make well over 1000 horsepower. McLaren 720S, made out of Legos. Clearly some people have way too much time on their hands. The Brooklands Museum is home to another museum, the London Bus Museum. The thing to remember here is that buses in London were not always red. Only sometimes. A London taxi from 1955. I did find something interesting in here. This camel tractor is towing the staff canteen. An extraordinary concept. You can eat in and take out at the same time. In addition to the indoors collections, you will also find classic cars parked randomly around the museum, like this old Land Rover ambulance. This nicely restored MGB GT, probably owned by a member of staff, and a Morris Minor van in Caledonian Airways livery. The opening of the racing circuit was an instant hit, and Brooklands soon started attracting a new type of motorized vehicle, the airplane. Elliot Verdon Rowe of Avro fame started experimenting with aircraft as early as 1908. By 1918, Brooklands would become Britain's largest aircraft manufacturing centre, with the Vickers factory at its heart. Hawker would also build a factory here, and the two would influence the fate of Brooklands for decades to come. On the left, we have a reproduction of the Vickers Vimy, and on the right, a Hawker Harrier, capable of taking off and landing vertically. This hangar was part of the Vickers factory. The Wellington bomber in the middle was fished out of the Loch Ness and is now being restored. The hangar also houses this Blériot 11 replica, the first plane to fly across the English Channel. And this Hawker P1127 is an early prototype of what would become the Harrier. You can also clearly see the directional jet ducts that allow the aircraft to take off vertically and then transition to level flight. Here we have the legendary Hurricane, the main defense during the Battle of Britain. Another Harrier, this time a two-seater trainer version. And a Hawker Hawk, made famous by the Red Arrow's acrobatics team. This is a 1909 Santos Dumont Demoiselle replica, one of the world's first practical light aircraft. On to a very successful early fighter plane, the Sopwith Camel. It employs an unusual rotary engine configuration, where the crankshaft is bolted to the fuselage while the entire engine block spins with the propeller. Now, something rather different. This is the Vickers VC-10, the largest aircraft ever built in Britain. This particular example was used by the Sultan of Oman and then donated to the museum. Its most unusual feature are the 4 Rolls-Royce engines mounted on the tail. From the largest to the bestseller. The BAC-111 was a small regional jet airliner that sold all around the world in great numbers, by British standards. The rear staircase is the coolest thing ever. On to some turboprops, like this Vickers Vanguard, a mid-range airliner powered by 4 turboprops. This one started life as a passenger plane, but was later refitted to carry cargo. Only 44 were ever built. 10 times as many were made of this next aircraft, the Vickers Viscount. Was the world's first turboprop airliner. It was powered by 4 1900 horsepower Rolls-Royce Dart engines. This cabinet probably holds all of the Viscount scale models in existence. And I saved the best for last. The crown jewel of the museum, Concorde. A joint project between BAC and Aerospatiale, the Concorde would be the fastest passenger aircraft ever made, flying routes over the Atlantic at twice the speed of sound. All the more astonishing is that it first flew in 1969. Brooklands production facilities made 1/3 of all major components for both British and French Concordes. This particular one was the first production version of the British fleet. Here you can observe the nose lens, a telltale sign of supersonic capability. Concorde was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus engines. Unique for an airline engine, it was fitted with an exhaust reheater or afterburner, necessary to go supersonic. And a little known fact, the Concorde is a tail dragger. To board the plane, you need to buy a boarding pass. And then you'll receive a guided tour of the interior. "20 Concordes were built, and the last flight was in 2003. Its demise was ultimately owed to high operation costs. Towards the end of its life, a London-New York return ticket cost well over £6,000. Even so, Concorde was operated at a loss, with the British and French governments heavily subsidizing the program. With the tour finished, you'll be handed a flight certificate signed by the pilot. This was part of Concorde experience at British Airways.